I am a huge proponent, avid supporter of national security. I think it's an imperative for our nation. Oftentimes, I think it doesn't get the attention that it deserves.
My guest today is Teresa Shea, a lifelong national security leader whose career spans more than 3 decades at the National Security Agency. Teresa's journey runs from soldering circuit boards as a young engineer to shaping some of the most consequential intelligence and cybersecurity missions of our time. She's lived through defining moments like 9/11, the digital transformation of intelligence, and the reckoning that followed the Edward Snowden disclosures.
If you want to be the decision maker, you're going to have to take on the responsibility along with that authority. My whole job then was empowering my people.
In our conversation, Teresa reflects on leadership, trust in institutions, the future of AI, and why national security is ultimately personal.
You are serving the nation in providing actionable and timely information for the decision maker. I keep on my desk today. It was a letter from one of the soldiers in Afghanistan because we saved his entire command by providing early indication and warning.
This was a thoughtful, candid conversation, and I'm excited to share it with you. And now, here's Teresa Shea. So we're here. So Teresa Shea is sitting across from me. And the first question to get us moving is going to be, who is Teresa Shea? Who is sitting across from me? I always love to see how people answer this.
Andy, it's great to be here. Thanks very much for
You're very
having
welcome.
me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Who is Teresa Shea? Well, it turns out there's quite a few of us out there.
Okay, I can imagine.
But if you're talking about me, which I assume you are, since I'm sitting in the hot seat, I will start by saying I am a huge proponent, avid supporter of national security. And my career really has been based in national security. I think it's an imperative for our nation. And oftentimes, I think it doesn't get the attention that it deserves. So that's number one. Number two, you need to know I'm a grandmother, and I have 5 grandchildren.
Awesome.
And they are the joy of our life. We spend a lot of time with them, even though none of them are close. I've got 3 in California and 2 up in Massachusetts. So I'm on the road quite a bit to visit them or have them come visit me.
And what a reason to care about national security.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can we move the mic a little bit closer to you? Is that good? You guys good with that?
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Yeah. In national security, I think it's personal for a lot of people. Like, for example, now I have a son-in-law who's in the Navy, active duty Navy. And, it matters. I want to keep him alive and
safe. And
my grandchildren safe, as you point out. And there's a lot of things to be a little bit concerned about right now.
Yeah, I think national security is always a conversation worth having. I think the time that we're in is particularly concerning. I mean, there's just a lot happening domestically. There's a lot happening internationally. There's a lot of geopolitical maneuvering. We have all the different domains of things. Cybersecurity, of course, is a massive domain where there's a lot of activity. So there's a lot that we can explore here. And your passion for national security comes from, you mentioned, a long and storied career. Where does that start? Where's that first, bit of fire get lit?
Yeah. Well, let's go back. I really grew up in Georgia a long time ago, and I was going to be a math teacher. Okay. And then I went to Georgia Southern as a freshman, and I loved math, started really looking into what math teachers got paid.
A rare breed.
And in the state of Georgia, they weren't paid very much. I think it was even below minimum wage at the time. So I decided I would go into engineering. So I went to Georgia Tech, which was only 17 miles from my house. So I got a degree in electrical engineering at Georgia Tech. And while I was there, now, I think the ratio has gotten a little better, but there were 6 guys to every...
That's what I was thinking.
Every girl. So I felt like I had my pick. I don't know how they felt, but I met my future husband there, and he went and co-opted at the Central Intelligence Agency in Virginia. So I wanted to be close to him during sort of our last summer together. And I didn't want to necessarily go to the same place. And NSA, the National Security Agency, was at Fort Meade, Maryland, not too far from CIA. So I ended up doing a summer internship there. And I got to tell you, Andy, I loved it.
Yeah.
I mean, I loved the mission. I loved the people. People put mission first. It was a priority. And I couldn't get enough. I really, really loved it.
I want to talk about that. So we talk about, I mentioned domestic sort of challenges right now. And something that we talk about a lot is our institutions and the American public having a lot of skepticism toward institutions. There's a lot of vitriolic language used about people who work in institutions.
Yeah.
There's a lot of these people are taking advantage of us by being on the federal dole or whatever else. But I haven't been employed by the federal government. I haven't worked for the NSA or the FBI or CISA or whoever, but I've met people who have been in those fields, who have led those teams, and everyone to a T says these people that work there care. They are passionate. They care about the mission. They care about the American public. They're talented, smart people who could be in private industry making a lot more money, but they care so much about the mission that they're willing to sacrifice that. And then all the other sacrifices you have to make to be in classified environments and whatnot. I had Bob Skinner on the podcast recently, and he was talking about how much of his career, phone had to stay out in the car. He has to be disconnected from life while everyone else, like me, gets to work from home and see my family while I'm working, that type of stuff. So I love that we have people who care about the mission and that they're truly and honestly motivated by it. I'm sure there are outliers, but if that's the MO, the standard, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my experience was that was absolutely the standard. By the way, Bob Skinner is a national hero in my book. So I can't wait to hear his interview.
We had a very good conversation. And again, it was very self-serving. He taught me a lot in just the time we had. And this is going to be another one of those self-serving conversations for me where I'm going to get you to teach me a lot as we go.
Now, look, I'm not going to say that it's not a bureaucracy. It's a big organization. And as you know, you work with a lot of them. They are very bureaucratic. Yes. So you do have, like you have in all bureaucracies, some people that are not as energetic as you would maybe like them to be.
Sure.
And so, but what happens, I think, is it's contagious. You do know at the end of every day that you've made a difference that day. And the leadership that I experienced there really made an effort to make sure that I was an engineer when I started there, electrical engineer. I was in a lab soldering printed circuit boards. What did I know this? Hey, I had no idea what this printed circuit board was going to do. I just did what I was told. But the leadership did a great job of making sure we understood what we were contributing to. I was in the SIGINT mission. NSA has two missions. That's the Signals Intelligence mission and the Information Assurance mission, which we call cybersecurity today. But they really made an effort to make sure how we were serving either our national customers, or another thing about NSA is it's a combat support agency. So it's part of DOW now. Then it was DOD, Department of Defense. And there's 3 agencies within the intelligence community that are actually combat support agency: the National Geospatial Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and NSA, the National Security Agency. So our directors kind of are dual-hatted. They work both for the national side or the intelligence community and for the Department of Defense. So I'm getting off a little bit, but the point.
This is good education. A lot of people don't know this.
The point is that you are serving the nation and providing actionable and timely information for the decision maker. There's really only one item that I keep on my desk today, and it was a letter from one of the soldiers in Afghanistan because we saved his entire command by providing early indication and warning, and it prevented them from getting into an ambush. And that,
Yeah, that's a career maker, I imagine. I mean, that makes it all worth it.
that's right. I mean, when you know you're saving lives like that, that's really what matters. And that's really what brings us together.
I think there's a couple things you said in there, like a deep lesson in good leadership is, make sure the person soldering the printed board understands what they're serving.
Yeah.
Right. If people have buy into the mission, they're willing to put in the effort and make sure that the printed board that you're soldering is properly done and you're not going to cut any corners because you know what impact that could go on to have. I think that's super important. And and ultimately the satisfaction from serving a mission like that.
Yeah.
That's,
I mean, you can't
awesome.
talk about it, right? I mean, as I'm sure you heard from Bob, it's not like you can go home at the end of the day and have a conversation about what you did.
Babe, you'll never guess what we did. We just saved a whole unit in Afghanistan. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that makes it hard sometimes, especially when things don't go right. And, I think my career was shaped by a couple of major events that, didn't go right, weren't good things. And,
Sure.
that has a lot of emotions along with everything else.
I'm sure. For the passion for the mission, the belief in the mission, the NSA that you have, I can imagine the NSA becoming in the crosshairs of the American public for controversial things can be hard.
Exactly.
When everyone's painting like, hey, we have this evil group that's doing evil things, and you're trying to say, guys, we're trying to do the right thing. We're on the right mission. I'm sure everyone will agree mistakes were made somewhere in there, but I can imagine that being hard, being on the inside and seeing like, no, we're good people. You're misinterpreting or misattributing things to us that aren't true.
Yeah. I know we're in an age of artificial intelligence, and I just heard a great talk by Jason Matheny, who's the CEO over at RAND Corporation, on superintelligence. This is when machines take over. But
You said when, not if.
But the mission is still performed today and had been through my whole career by humans. And to your point, humans make mistakes. I mean, we're not infallible, but we always try to do the right thing.
Yeah, and institutions are just groups of people, right? And that goes back to what I've said and what everyone who sat across from me on this about those institutions that they work in is like, again, the people care, they're on mission, but we are people, right? And we are bureaucracies, but that's just kind of, we're working with the constraints of human beings, right? So it's good for people to be reminded, and I try to make a point in my personal life. I share my podcast often with people in my personal life, which I don't often share a lot of my work life with. But when I have people come on and talk about their human experience of being at these institutions, that everyone in my private life, I hear them at birthday parties and whatever, talking about the government BS and everything. I'm like, guys, these are human beings in positions that they care about trying to help you.
Yeah.
They're trying to do the right thing. They're human. Give them some credit.
Well, thank you for that. That's great.
It's a learned perspective. I've been doing the Watchers for, almost 2 years. I've learned a lot from talking to people in all these institutions. We started off with Andrew McCabe, who gave me insight into the FBI and a career in the FBI, and was associated with the most recent controversy in the FBI against his will, of course. But seeing that and then hearing that, and then CISA, Department of Energy and Department of Agriculture, I've heard from all these different folks who've been in these positions, and all tell me the same thing. The people there care about the work they're doing. Do they make mistakes? Absolutely.
Right.
But so does everybody.
That's right. That's right.
That's human.
Right. Exactly.
Right? Now, maybe the super intelligent AI is coming to make no mistakes ever. I don't think that's gonna be in our best interest if they take over everything. But it's a good place to start, I think.
Yeah.
Now let's get into your career. You went to the NSA.
I did.
And it sounds like you kind of went sight unseen a little bit on, like, were you sure of what to expect? Was anything surprising?
I had done a summer internship, and what happened was I actually married my boyfriend later. But when we graduated we both went to Georgia Tech, And when we graduated, he went on to get his graduate degree out in Illinois, in the middle of
Okay,
nowhere,
Georgia to
University
Illinois.
of Illinois. It was terrible. I so when
Shout out University of Illinois.
it was terrible. It was no, I don't mean to insult anybody from Illinois, but it was freezing cold in Champaign-Urbana, and I didn't care which direction you were walking in, the wind blew in your face. But I went to work for Illinois Power Company out there. This was before we got married. Then when he graduated, we got married, and he took a job at NSA.
Okay.
So yeah, his college roommate at Georgia Tech was working there and really convinced him to come to NSA. So he went there, and when we moved to Maryland, I was pregnant with our first child. So after I knew I wanted to work, it was one of those times where you have your first baby and you're like in this dilemma. And I think all mothers go through this, like, yeah, how am I going to do this? I don't really want to leave her, but I really want to get some work. So I was going to work part-time and had that kind of all worked out. Then it fell through at the last minute. I ended up going full-time when she was about a year old. And that's how it sort of all got started. And as I said, I was an electrical engineer and I worked in a lab. And back then, Andy, I know you don't remember these, but I think they're coming back in vogue. You remember those girly calendars? You ever seen one of those girly calendars? Where you have pictures of naked women or very scantily
I'm aware that those exist.
They were, the technicians there and some of the engineers, because it was all guys,
Yep.
right? There weren't any other women there. And they had them hanging on their lab bench. And I remember how that really disturbed me.
I can imagine.
I didn't know how to handle that. I was this brand new, engineer, brand new mother. I just didn't know quite how to handle that. And one of the technicians who had really befriended me, he was an older gentleman, wonderful guy. His name was Roger. I still remember him. He really kind of took me under his wing and helped mentor me. And I'm always be very grateful for that. But just finally one day I got up the courage to say something to him. And I remember he looked at me. He goes, "That bothers you?" Like he had no idea. And the next day, every one of the girly pictures was gone. And so I became aware early in my career that people don't assume people know what you're thinking or what might bother you or what might not bother you. Have that conversation, because I've done that now quite a few times in my career, and it's never really gone off the rails. It's never really been a bad thing. Yeah? We can, agree to disagree on some things.
Yeah.
But it certainly was one of those early lessons. And for being a woman in a very male-dominated environment, it really helped me. And I was able to then work very effectively in those kind of environments. And I think it helped them to come to a little bit more of a realization, especially as we got more and more women in engineering and at NSA.
Yeah, I think what's the quote, like, don't attribute to malice what can be attributed to, it's not ignorance, is it? I don't know the quote.
I don't know, but I love that.
Yeah, it's a great thing. Like a lot of times, someone doing something that looks outwardly like, why would you not know that that's a problem? Sometimes it's just like, oh, I just needed someone to tell me, and yeah, no, absolutely, we'll solve that problem. Didn't even cross my mind, especially in changing dynamics. I could see that being a thing. So I think it's great that you have that perspective of like, yeah, I was just making them aware of something that they weren't aware of.
Yeah.
And everyone acted in good faith, and like we had a communication about it. Amazing how that can solve problems, guys. Like if we just talk about things together, we can solve stuff. Don't assume what's in everyone else's head. That's a great professional and life lesson.
Yeah. And it was great to learn it very early. It was because it's a life lesson, right? And it served me in a lot of different ways. But so I kind of went up the ranks a little bit there at NSA as a technical director. So we had two tracks of leaders at NSA. We kind of had the management track and we had the technical track. And we call them DISLs and DICEs, Defense Intelligence Senior Executive Service and Defense Intelligence Leadership Service. And their government, I think it's pretty government-wide across the board, although different agencies call them different things. And I was sort of on this technical track. And then, Andy, one thing I learned about myself, I have a control problem. Yeah, like I didn't like not making the decisions. I'd recommend to my boss, we got to go down this path for this, and this reason.
Yeah.
And then they did something else.
Yeah.
I was like,
It can be frustrating.
wait a minute. Well, if you want to be the decision maker, you're going to have to take on the responsibility along with that authority. And so I went into a branch chief position. And one of the other things, that I learned early on is my whole job then was empowering my people, right? Making sure they had what they needed to get their job done, not to do the job for them. And we had the most success when we moved obstacles out of the way and they were able to do their job. And I turned out I loved watching people succeed. I mean, I was so proud of them. And
I'm sure.
People didn't think they could do things that when you have high expectations of people, they usually rise to those expectations. And people were just very surprised sometimes at themselves and how well they did. And so I basically then, when I found out I really liked leadership, became I've been a lifelong student of leadership. Things change. People change.
Sure.
Generations change.
Very much so.
I mean, we all have different experiences. We grow up with different technical apparatus. And so you have to be this constant learner. I think everybody does, but especially as a leader, you're just constantly learning. So I ended up going up the
other track, the one that you weren't expecting.
Ended up, kind of going up. But early on in my career, and, again, I'm old, Andy, so, I spent a lot of time there, over like 34 years there. And when I first started, we were in a HF world. I mean, we were not HF, RF world. We were really in the signals intelligence mission. We were really collecting foreign.
By RF, do you mean radio frequency?
Yeah, radio frequency. We were collecting foreign signals to then analyze and produce signals intelligence, again, those actionable insights for the leadership. And it was primarily transmissions were radio frequency transmissions. And then overnight, really, but at least I remember it being pretty abrupt, we converted to digital. We had it's called, the telecommunications networks were built on circuit switches.
Yeah.
And then they went to, you're in this business. And then they went to packet switches and they went digital. And some of our, hardest targets that we were trying to collect intelligence on went from analog to digital. And overnight we lost all that access.
Decades of positioning and workflow. Yeah, I can imagine for the right people, that's the best time to be there. Like, right? Because it's like we're reinventing the wheel, like back to the drawing board,
Exactly.
For certain people, that's what I want. I can imagine that being a very fascinating time. Like, I was I think about the 90s as when a lot of this really changed, and from seeing it as a kid and seeing technology change and whatnot, it was fascinating enough. I imagine being in that environment would have been very fascinating to see this paradigm shift. I do wonder, did we see it for what it was at the time? Like, did we realize that it was a different world that we shifted into?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes. We lost so much at that time. that, there was, here's another thing I learned. Don't panic. It doesn't do you any good to panic.
Yeah.
But there was some a concern, some grave concern in the leadership that, we were going to go deaf. But I'll tell you this, Andy, and we've talked a little bit about the NSA workforce. They have a brilliant workforce, and they're problem solvers, right? And they're passionate about that. And, we solved that problem. But what I was going to say about that was, when this whole thing happened, I was really, getting to this continuous learning. I was an analog person, right? And I needed to become a digital person pretty quickly. So, I went back to graduate school, and I thought it was a big deal at the time, really focused on digital signal processing. It really helped me to understand where we were going, what we were dealing with, and, kind of to try and anticipate perhaps some of this happening in the future versus having it kind of happen to us overnight. So it was like you said, it was a very interesting time, and we got some new capability, and worked really hard to really kind of lay that in. And then, when I mentioned earlier that I had a couple of major events in my career that really shaped my career. And one of them was 9/11. And, I don't think you'll talk to anybody that was there in the intelligence community at the time of 9/11 that did not take that personally. It was a failure. Our whole job is to prevent strategic surprise. And that was very much a surprise. And so, that really changed how we worked. We worked, and also, quite frankly, it changed the focus, the priority of the target set. Now we had a terrorism mission that was completely different, that required innovation on how to exploit terrorists, which was not something we had really done. We had really been focused on leadership.
I've had a number of people in different agencies and whatnot on, and 9/11 always comes up. Either it happened during their career or it was a motivator for the career. And we've said it a number of times, like the world changed, and we're 25 years removed from it almost. In retrospect, more and more I'm seeing, wow, it really changed. Because everyone shifted. I mentioned we had Andrew McCabe on the podcast talking from the FBI. Suddenly they had to become a counterterrorism agency. Everyone had to shift.
Yeah.
And I have heard, that people in the intelligence agency feel or felt maybe accountable, and like they failed. And there was like a separate grieving process. Like nationally, we were all grieving.
Yeah.
But in the intelligence community, it was like, this is on us.
Yeah.
Which, I'm on the one hand, I'm like, it sucks you guys felt that way, but I'm glad that people in those positions hold themselves accountable, right? And at the end of the day, we can't catch every threat. We're not going to catch them all, but I'm glad that we have the people who think that they're accountable,
Yes, absolutely. And, we absolutely knew we were accountable. And at the time, General Hayden, Michael Hayden was our director. Terrific guy. And I was a brand new senior executive, and he got up on stage and, he said, "This is a failure of our imagination." He was absolutely right. We didn't imagine an attack like that. I mean, we were looking for all what you might consider, we were looking for all the kinetic attacks that we were familiar with.
Right.
Not something we were completely not familiar with. And we really learned, and we often repeat that, although I know I'm getting old because the generation coming in now, they didn't live through 9/11.
Right. Which is crazy to think about.
Right? Which is pretty crazy to think about, but absolutely true. So, trying to really kind of teach them the imperative of, this is a lesson we learned the hard way. We don't want you to have to go through this. We never, ever want to have this happen again. And so you have to always be thinking forward and being, creative about the targeting, as well as, the capability development.
That is a fascinating problem to have to solve for, that when it's lived in, and I'm certain for the people that were in those agencies when it happened, like that follows you the rest of your career. You can always go back to that moment and how you felt and how that impacted things. But to then try to instill that, like, generational lessons, how do you transmit that and make them care in the way that you do because of the experience? I imagine that's just so difficult to transmit that. And I imagine a lot of the people who responded to 9/11 and who were in the agencies for that time are no longer there. There's probably not many who are still there to make sure that that lesson gets repeated. Makes you kind of fearful that maybe we will forget some of the lessons there. But
yeah, well,
that's humanity.
Certainly, I hope we do not have to relive any of those lessons the hard way. That's the real scary part.
I think that was a great quote. Who was the director you said?
General Hayden.
Michael
Hayden.
With, failure of imagination. I think that's a great way to put it. And what a lesson to learn, and a lesson we should be applying to problem solving everywhere, right? Take a step back.
That's a good point.
What are you not thinking about?
Yeah.
What's the craziest? Let's get some outside the box stuff, right? Yeah. I remember, my experience as kind of a kid. I mentioned this on a recent podcast I had with Don Yeski. We were talking about 9/11, and I was saying, my experience as a kid. You heard about terrorism that happened over there. Like, I knew about the USS Cole. I remember that.
Yeah.
Right. But that happened to our military guys over there. Stuff didn't happen here in the 90s. Growing up in the 90s, it was all idyllic for the most part. Bad stuff was happening. You didn't see it, right? We didn't have social media, but nothing like that. And then suddenly it's a different world for anyone, especially for kids. Like, that happened here.
Yeah.
I've been to New York City. I've been to DC. I've seen the Pentagon.
Right.
That all happened here. Was
Do you remember?
big shift.
Do you remember where you were?
I'll never forget. Absolutely. Yeah. I can't talk about it because it's, just what a crazy.
It's so emotional.
Yeah. And 25 years have passed. But yes, I absolutely remember everything about it.
Yeah. Was it one of the drivers for the field you're in today, cybersecurity?
Maybe.
Yeah.
I haven't put a lot of thought to that.
Yeah.
I'm sure, at some level, where your patriotism comes from and the desire for the mission. I'm also involved in fire and EMS.
Yes.
And so that's a big piece of it. Yeah. I'm sure it's in there. I don't know if I've totally made the connection.
Yeah.
But there's something to that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good thing. I think, the impact it had on so many people to do something about it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think that has been a really good, it really pulled us together as a nation.
Yes.
And I just, especially with a lot of what's going on now, I remember that. And I remember we cannot fracture as a nation. Yes. It's so imperative that we listen to each other, protect each other, and care for each other, quite frankly. Yeah,
it makes me increasingly angry, anyone that wants to be a wedge, right? Who creates a wedge for their own reasons. Look at what you're doing on the large scale. Like, we are Americans. We disagree on a lot. We always have. Yeah, right? But when it comes down to it, and when, the proverbial shit hits the fan, we come together. And there's a lot that I remember about the aftermath of that, and all of the adults having to figure out, how do we explain this to kids, right?
Yeah.
I had to go to school the next day, and we weren't going to learn anything the next day of math or literature or anything. We talked about it. Every teacher had something to say and had to, have a real world talk with a bunch of middle schoolers about, you're in a different world today, and we wish you didn't have to see that.
Yeah.
But, we did. And kudos to everybody. We managed it,
Yeah, yeah, we did. But for us at NSA, it really changed the way we thought, the way we worked. And I work closely with Andy, and I love that guy. He's just so dedicated and so smart. But we really started working much more closely together across the aisles, with FBI, with CIA. NSA and CIA always had kind of one of those storied pasts where
Little rivalry.
we had a little rivalry. It was a good thing, the rivalry. But one thing that you really have to do and spend time doing is building trust. Trust between people, trust between individuals. And I spent a lot of time building those relationships because it does take time. It takes time and energy, right? The time you're spending with me today, I mean, that it matters. And so I spent a lot of time building relationships and trust, not just within NSA, but across the aisles, across the continents, with our Five Eyes partners in particular. And that always paid off, especially in those moments when things didn't go well.
Yeah.
And you want to be able to call across the continent or, across the river, and you want your counterpart to pick up the phone. And if you don't have that relationship, they might have something more important they think they have to do.
Right. And if you haven't serviced it, it's something you have to proactively manage and be thoughtful about.
Yeah, and keep at it, right? I'm happy to say that many of those colleagues are good friends today, even though we're not in, and none of us are in anymore. It's just the relationship is lifelong.
Yeah.
And it matters, and it really matters. But as we progressed in this counterterrorism mission, and the things we're a very technically savvy organization, and we were quite creative on how we were going to be able to exploit these terrorists. But one of the missions that we really started was the computer network exploitation mission. And I'm going down this path. I don't know really why to tell you this story, but one of the other really game changers for me at NSA was I got a call. Again, I'm a new senior. I got a call from the deputy director. Never got calls from the deputy director. Like telling me he wanted me to come see him in his office. I didn't even know where his office was. But, I showed up, worried, sick. I was going to be fired. I did something wrong, as you will do if your boss calls you, right?
Yeah, of course.
And it turned out he wanted me to lead that organization. It was called Tailored Access Operations. And, of course, my first reaction was, yeah. I can give you a list of people that would be better at this than me. And he was like, when you're a senior executive, you serve at the pleasure of the director. Now, one thing I'll say is I've learned now that can be a female reaction to taking on great responsibility, but so women don't do that. In fact, men don't do that either.
You think the default position of I'm not the right person, clearly?
Yeah. Take the risk. Take the position. Surround yourself with smart people. You're going to be great. Not that I was, but you get my point.
Sure.
And so anyway, I took on this organization, and we did some really, really cool things, some really impressive things for the nation. And I give a lot of credit to General Keith Alexander. I don't know if you've met him.
Mm-hmm.
He came in after General Hayden, and he really was great. He was also another great leader that we had, who spent a lot of time making sure that we elevated that mission to, a national asset. And I think that's what he achieved before, he ended up retiring. But it was quite the experience, and quite, shaping for me in terms of my career and the things I learned doing that. And it was a good time.
When did you leave the NSA?
I left in 2015.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you were there for, I don't know how much you can talk about, but obviously the big Edward Snowden thing and sort of all the revelations of the NSA. I'm curious what the impact was on, people working at the NSA.
Yeah.
Those
Do you have any
revelations and those.
alcohol over there I could replace this water with?
I don't have that bottle under the
Yeah,
table at the
so
moment.
it's funny you should bring that up because that would have been my third biggest thing that really impacted me during my career. I was a SIGINT director. I was a signals intelligence director in June of 2013 is when that happened. And he revealed, of course, as you know, a trove of national secrets, probably the greatest intelligence leak, I think, for our nation of all times.
I'd say if it's not the one, it's up there, right?
Yeah. I mean, there was just a lot. And my first reaction to it was, again, I told you about, being able to build those trust relationships, picking up the phone and being able to call my European partners. And, people were dying from this release. And my CIA friends, but they took the call, even though they were, like everybody, pretty upset with NSA at the time. And we couldn't defend ourselves publicly because the information was still classified. And we take an oath. We all take an oath, including Edward Snowden, to protect classified information. And so, that was one thing we were leaving up to our overseers who knew everything about us, was to be the ones to tell the American public exactly what was going on. But I was going to mention, and this is sort of leading into when I left NSA and ended up going to NQTEL, a strategic investment firm that invests in companies for the intelligence community. I picked up the phone, called my friend Glenn Gaffney, who is the director of the Central Intelligence Agency's Department of Science and Technology at the time. And he's, I was like, I can't trust the SIGINT system. I can't trust the intelligence we're getting. How do I know that it's not being somehow, messed with, because they have all this information on our sources and methods. And I know what I would do if I had that on them. Right? I mean, that's your job. That's what you're supposed to do. Maximize.
Creating doubt in the intelligence community. What a great thing to do for the adversary.
Exactly. So he said, hey, you need to meet Chris Darby over at NQTEL because he's got some great capabilities that in some companies that he's invested in. And so, I ended up meeting Chris, and, the interesting, quite traumatic time for me. We were being sued by everybody, but I was a SIGINT director, so my name was out there publicly on the affidavits in these court cases, articulating what the SIGINT system did. And so I had a lot of attacks, largely from the press, and also from the state of California. And, it was just an interesting time. But Chris Darby came in, and one of the things he met with me, and he asked me, he said, Teresa, you need to come speak at our CEO summit in Sunnyvale, California. I'm like, no, I don't feel like having tomatoes thrown at my face. I mean, that could be really
particularly
bad.
Unpopular in California, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, they were threatening to shut off our water. It was pretty bad, but turned out to be a great thing. And I think our startup community, you included, is a national asset for this nation, and we should be doing more. I'm really for that community. I'm really thrilled to see some of the changes going on in the acquisition process today to allow us to take advantage more of the smaller companies.
Yeah, well, wherever anyone can execute influence on how the government handles the private industry, like definitely hold private industry accountable, but also sometimes I see decisions and I talk to people who make some decisions, and their perspective sometimes is like, well, this is how we do it in the government. When they want us to do something, well, but there's a reason you have us. Yeah. Don't treat us the same way. There's different pros and cons to how we operate, and you want innovation and speed and agility down here. You can't have that. You're bureaucratic. You
That's
have
right.
your mission and your strengths, right? So wherever you can execute that influence and remind them, hey, we need that. We need innovation. Don't hamstring them in any way that you can, right? Obviously, we need to have mission assurance. We have to have cybersecurity. These are good outcomes we're working toward. But don't lose that perspective. Don't just be like, well, this is how we do it in the government.
Yes.
It's not going to work.
Yeah. Yeah. This not invented here syndrome, and certainly NSA was guilty of that. That is not serving us well. We don't have speed today, and that our adversaries have access to the same technology we use at the same moment. And it's a race.
Right.
And we're losing. Because one of the things is they don't have the rules.
Right. They're less constrained.
They're less constrained than we are. And
care less about human rights.
That's right. But that, we're there because we're protecting our democracy and our privacy rights and our civil liberties. That is a culture at NSA. And I'm proud to say that was confirmed. But, when Snowden happened, there was a whole panel brought in to review us, a privacy and civil liberties panel made up of privacy and civil liberties advocates. And one of them, I remember, Jeffrey Hines from Chicago, University of Chicago, I think he said. And he was very skeptical, for example, when they came in, they were very skeptical. They were looking for all the bad things we had done, and ended up saying, you guys, you absolutely walk your talk and you adhere to the law, the policies. You don't have control over everything. Telecommunications industries change all the time. They're how they transmit signals and where they go. And those changes happen to us. So we have to adapt, going back to our conversation earlier about mistakes and being human and that kind of thing. But I'm very proud of the fact that we were very adherent to law. If you don't like the law, change the law. But we did absolutely abide by it.
So not to press you to speak on behalf of the NSA, right? But the lay person understanding that most people have, and most people would say, if I was like, hey, what was the whole Snowden thing about? Like, what did we learn from that? Everyone would say that they were spying on citizens. Is that an unfair characterization?
I absolutely think that's an unfair character. And I do thank you for saying I do not speak for NSA.
Yes, yeah.
This is Teresa Shea, personal opinion, personal experience, nothing more. There is a process if a U.S. citizen is considered a target for either, interacting with a target, like being on the other end of the phone call or something like that. There is a process we go through to get a warrant that enables us then, and FBI is involved in that because NSA does not. It protects, we don't spy on U.S. citizens without a warrant from a FISA court judge. And I know there was a lot of talk about the FISA court, and I saw some articles that, were like, they're a rubber stamp. Well, if you've ever stood up in front of the FISA court, you would appreciate the fact that they are not a rubber stamp and that they ask very hard questions and that I thought they did their job very well. I didn't always get what I wanted.
Which, frankly, I'm sorry to tell you, as a citizen, I'm glad, right? We want a hard gate to pass.
Yeah.
We want you to have, we want the people in SIGINT to have the capability to protect us, but we also want to protect civil liberties, and we want that friction. That's good friction.
That's right. That's right, Andy. You're absolutely right there. I know at the time I felt like I failed when I didn't get what I wanted, but now I have perspective. That's better, and I think you're absolutely right. You want that friction. You don't want to get everything you may desire.
Yeah, and people need, I think, let's get a little philosophical or soapboxy here, not to get too much, but one of the rising voices is criticism of democracy because it has so much friction. That's a feature, not a bug.
Right. That's right.
Does it mean we move slow sometimes, and then sometimes we're at standstill and gridlock and all that? Yeah. Would you rather it be, autocratic? We don't want that.
No. No, I don't want that for my grandchildren.
Right. So you have to embrace it and embrace the fact that, yeah, it's ineffective, inefficient at times. Sure.
Yeah.
But it protects the outcome.
That's right.
We want democracy. The goal here is not to operate the most streamlined federal government imaginable. You got to bake in a little friction.
Yeah. I think there's a great Winston Churchill quote.
As there are many.
Along those lines, where democracy, just because I don't remember exactly what it is, but it goes along the line of exactly what you're saying. It's, it's maybe that after you try everything else,
Yeah,
it's the one that serves you the best.
Yeah, it's something like maybe it's the worst form of government, except for all the others.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's more like it.
Which is like, yeah, dead on. Like, again, it's human beings,
That's
right?
right.
And human beings, we're challenging creatures,
Yeah. Hey, you know what? I'm very proud of our democracy.
Same.
It's
withstood a lot.
Yeah, it sure has. And you really come to appreciate it when you're in other countries, right?
Yes. And I'm sure the perspective and some of the things that cross the desk of the NSA from a SIGINT and how other countries operate and how they control their citizenry, like people, there are viable criticisms to go around, of course.
Yeah.
There are a lot of government reforms that need to happen at every agency, from the small locals to the Fed. I'm with everyone who says that. But you got to take some of the good with that bad. There's a lot of good to it. We have a lot of freedoms that, thankfully in the Western world are most countries have, but not the rest of the world. A lot of the world does not have, the privilege of the freedom that we have. And
yeah. Have you ever considered running for office? I'd vote for it.
I don't think I would want to do such a thing because, this is something I'm, again, philosophical a little bit. Boy, what an environment we're creating to drive people away from the idea of public service.
Yeah. Yeah. It's scary.
Or public office because of how vitriolic and like I've thought, like, what would that look like? And just what I've seen happen to people, get dragged through the mud, what happens to their families. They can never be private people again. Like, you can't go out in public ever again.
Yeah.
I appreciate the people who do it because, like, your life can never be the same.
That's right. Yeah.
It's not the idyllic thing we had back in the day where it was George Washington and the concept of, he was, I'm deep in the George Washington lore. I've read a lot of biographies about him. Fascinating guy. But he had this Cincinnatus character from Rome, famous general who like took over. But then when he was done and completed his mission, was like, I'm just going to go be a farmer now. And that was always what Washington was like, don't call me back into service. But he was a little vain where like if they called him up, he was like, I'm there, right? But we don't really have that, right? There's no just do your service and disappear.
Right. Right. That's true.
Which is disappointing. So long story short, no, I'm not. But I will do this. I love doing this. What about you? Can I put you forward for public office?
Oh, no, thank you. No, thank you. I mentioned I have 5 grandchildren. I like the way I spend my time. So, it's that's me today. And I want to do everything I can to, again, contribute to our national security and help others. I'm a huge believer in mentoring, and I'm involved in a couple of nonprofit organizations that I think really we're striving to lift everybody up. And so I want to do everything I can in that space.
Yeah.
So I want to continue to give back, but just not in the political arena, if you will.
Sure. Well, I think there's a space for that. Like, we need that, but also, boy, do we need the grassroots, the organic, the human to human connection and helping, force multiply. You can touch the lives of a couple dozen people in a serious way. And if you instill that in them, then they can touch a dozen and all that. And, it's interesting that we can tie back to you wanted to be a teacher.
Yeah, math teacher.
Right.
No doubt.
Right, which is like of the subjects to teach, that's a tough one because, boy, I struggle with math. But to take it back to teaching and that as a profession, you mentioned, the salary and what that life looks like. What a group of people who have to care about their mission to be able to do it, but how important that is.
Yeah.
You can't raise a generation on like video training. They need teachers, they need mentors, they need human beings to guide them. We all do.
That's right. That's right. I do think we definitely are underappreciative of our teachers. My sister is a teacher, math teacher in the state of Florida, and the time she spends individually with some of these students has made a huge, because students come back, and they say thank you when they're on with they graduate, etc. And to your point, you touch one life, that touches one life. That's how we pass it on.
That keeps this whole thing going.
Yeah, and my experience with mentoring is I get as much from who I'm talking to, probably more than anything they're getting from me. So, I learn from these, especially these young people coming up through the ranks now. It's just fascinating, the things they know and have experienced, very different than my own.
Yeah, well, it makes wise mentors who recognize that even the people younger than them have something to say and something to learn, right? It's occasionally you meet someone who thinks they've seen the world and seen it all and knows it all, and they're just like, hey, sit down, shut up, you listen, you sponge, and I'll explain, right? It only works if it's a conversation. Otherwise, It's just you soapboxing or even not soapboxing, just, ineffective.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to the NSA. Let's go back to, not to harp on the Snowden thing, but I'm interested what changed about the NSA, after that.
Yeah. Well, one of the huge changes was we recognized quickly that we needed to get out there more publicly. We were losing and lost trust of the American people.
Yeah.
If the National Security Agency doesn't have trust of the American people, they can't do their jobs effectively. And I think it's really important to get out there in public and get to know people. As I mentioned my experience when, Chris Darby came in and said, you need to go talk to the CEOs. You need to tell them what your tough technical challenges are and how they can help. And I ended up doing that. And what a great experience that turned out to be. I was scared to death. I really was. I was really afraid that I was going to get a lot of negative feedback and abuse. And it turned out not to be that way. It turns out, fundamentally, most people are good people. And, they'll listen and learn and be open-minded. And I think we, at least, look, my media experience really comes from that time, and it was very negative. I mean, false things were being printed as if they were accurate. Documents were being changed and then printed as if they were the real documents. I mean, we just had all kinds of stuff going on in the media that, again, we couldn't really counter. And that drove this. We have got to build a relationship with the American public. And I think NSA has really strived to do that, to becoming more and more transparent. They even tried having a podcast, although they haven't done anything lately.
You guys interested? We have a conversation. Send them on over.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen some you could, I don't know if this characterizes it the way that is fair, but it's like a reframing or like a rebuilding of reputation, right? Yeah. And it's almost like I've seen some like, hey, we embrace that we've made mistakes. We're human.
Right.
But this is what we're trying to do. This is what we learned from that, which I think is wise.
Yeah.
And you keep coming back to a concept of trust, right? And I love that. We talk about this a lot, even in our little company. The maxim is always, trust, you gain it in drops, but you lose it in buckets.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Every little thing's a little drop, and you get a bucket full, but it takes one person to kick. Right now, all that goodwill is lost. You got to turn the bucket back up and just start dropping again. Right. And over time, we'll get that back.
Right.
But it does feel, for whatever reason, there's different forces at work here, but American public's trust in the institutions is, if not at an all-time low, it's very low.
Yeah.
And those drops are happening, but then they're not in other places. It's concerning.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, as you said, the people there are what we should look at,
Yeah. Well, look, when you're out there and doing things like this podcast today, you're vulnerable, right? I mean, you can be interpreted perhaps wrong, whatever, you're vulnerable. And I think that makes it hard for people to put themselves out there. And we're all introverts at NSA. If I'm looking at your shoes instead of my shoes, and, that's a big thing. And so we're not used to being out in the public or speaking publicly. And that has been a real journey for us to get more and more out there and, quite frankly, be comfortable. My own family, I'll never forget my family's in Georgia. I'll never forget my youngest brother, calling me and saying, "Are you listening in on this phone call? Is NSA listening in on this phone call?" My own brother. I was like, really? Really? Do we have to have this conversation? But people start believing what they hear in media, and it's hard for them. Like, critical thinking is something that we absolutely have to continue to teach our generations, even with this artificial intelligence. I worry about how are we going to continue to teach people how to have that critical thinking and that discernment between what's real and maybe what's not as real.
Yeah. Well, again, let's take it back to teachers. What a challenge they have.
Yeah.
To try to instill it with all the competing concerns. And now you introduce this tool that creates all the motivation in the world for a student to not have to critically think because they can just offload the work.
Right.
It's got to be a tough time to be an academic.
Yeah.
Right?
And there's no magic. There's no magic solution here, right? You want students to learn how to use artificial intelligence in the right way. And I think it's pretty ubiquitous now. I mean, my grandchildren are using it. So you're seeing it more and more, and it's becoming pretty pervasive. And so, but you want people to, you want them to really learn, to your point. How do you teach them how to think critically about something they're seeing or hearing, or, questioning whether or not what ChatGPT is telling me is accurate?
Yeah. Yeah. To you, does it feel similar to the analog to digital shift? Like, do you feel like that's the level of change that we're going through, where AI is this fourth industrial revolution?
Well, for sure, AI is a revolution. And, I think it's going to be our coworkers next year. You're going to be interviewing. You're going to do an interview with it.
Well, there's 40 plus hours of this podcast. You could feed that to just about any AI, and I think it would be able to at least do my voice in a compelling way.
Yeah.
At least.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. No question. So, I do think you're going to have coworkers that are agents, AI agents. Our work roles are going to change because a lot of our tasks are going to go away, being overtaken by AI. And I think it will lift us up. We're going to become,
I hope so.
More supervisors of the agents, figuring out the workloads, figuring out the prompts. That's where a lot of that critical thinking, I think, is going to have to come into play. Yeah. How do you ask the right question to get that accurate answer? And so I do think we're quickly coming up on a lot of change. Now, for your business, it's going to be great.
Here's hoping.
There's every bad actor I know out there is using AI in some way, not just for speed, but for scale. Yeah, it's the holiday time. Don't anybody click on any of those links.
It's a great time for those gift cards to be sending around, right?
If you don't know who it's from, please don't click on it, because it's a great time for AI to be sending out all kinds of phishing, and they're getting really good. impersonating your voice,
Absolutely.
impersonating your persona, and making people think that they are you and you're reaching out for something. It's the security concerns I have around AI go far and wide. And I just think even with our ability, with our data and what we're using to train our models, I do think attackers are going to be starting to poison more ubiquitously poisoning that. And
Sure.
yeah, so it's not good, but keep up what you're doing. We need more
Yeah,
of
we're
it.
trying, definitely trying. I mean, I have like a social level concern because I see AI, and I've mentioned this a couple times on different episodes. Like I go up and down with it. There are times where I'm really high on it, and I feel like, wow, this is amazing, and it's going to be a great enabler. And then there's times, the power feels a bit scary. I love the idea of it being an uplift, and I love the idea of it helping take away some monotony and do things that, people shouldn't have to spend their time doing. But I also see this divide. I've already kind of seen this divide in society, in the DC area where I live. I live in Northern Virginia or Central Virginia now. People who work around the Beltway, we all get to work from home now. And boy, what a privilege is that when you have a family and how connected you can be. Already I've seen a divide between some folks who do that and then folks who still have to go somewhere. One of our neighbors and a good friend is a professional firefighter, has to leave for 24 hours plus every couple of days. We talk about work when we hang out, and he's like, man, I'm envious of you. Like, you just get to be home. Like, yeah, it's a tremendous privilege. Society still will need a lot of people to go put hands on. We still need all the trades.
Right.
All those jobs have to stay. I'm afraid we're going to create a further and further gap where, the so-called white collar will outpace the blue collar, and we'll really have an increasing class divide. I think there's a lot, of concern there. And then you look at automation, self-driving. There is the potential for such disruption that you lose swaths of people from a workforce and you don't have somewhere to put them or somewhere to, take them in. The concern is like, does our society have the tools? Do we have the policy discussions now for how we're going to handle something like mass unemployment when we decide, hey, it's 20% as expensive to have an AI run this than the person we pay a full-time salary to do it.
Yeah. And we have to work on that, right? We all have to work on that. But I think there's going to be new opportunity created.
Right, that's the thing. We're hoping,
we're
planning that there will be a gap to be filled still.
That's right. And, today we need to, as corporations, be retraining and upskilling our workforce today, constantly investing in that. There's nothing more important in my mind than the people that are doing whatever it is your business is that they're doing or whatever the government's doing, and making sure that they're constantly learning and upskilling and using artificial intelligence in their own jobs to just get them to a different level. Now, we talked about NSA. I mean, NSA's been using artificial intelligence or machine learning for decades. And one of the great accomplishments that we've had with that is just language translation, for example. But those linguists then became analysts as well as linguists, and they raised their proficiency so that they were training the models and developing the right questions to ask, or the prompts, if you will. We didn't have any kind of exodus of personnel as a result of applying technology to their workflows. And in this case, it was machine learning, artificial intelligence technology. But we did have an uplift. And so I guess based on that experience, I recognize that can't be true in all professions, perhaps, but I think there's opportunity out there to create new opportunities for people that are. Yeah.
We at least have to have the conversation, right? It needs to be proactively thought about. You can't, we can't on the one hand say like, hey, we're in the midst of a revolution here, and then not talk about, okay, what happens during revolution?
Yeah.
Things change,
Yeah.
right? And these are big moments in history where a lot changes and we have to be prepared to weather that,
Yeah.
weather the change.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. Like you can't stop it.
Yeah.
You can't really even slow it down because we're, as you said earlier, we're in a race. And I'm, feeling more and more to the point where like to not include AI in at least your plan of how you're going to execute starts to look like malpractice. You're just ignoring an increasingly useful tool.
Yeah.
You have to account for it.
Yeah. And I think there's some drivers. I'm involved in one organization. It's called the SCSP, Special Competitive Service Project, started by Eric Schmidt, prior CEO of Google, who is investing in this big AI conversation. They wrote a document and it's all online and you can look at it. But they have several kinds of engagements and events and conferences to bring people in to have those very needed conversations between the public and private sector. So let's bring the government to the table to talk with private industry about these concerns, issues, questions. Security is always a big part of that. That's always a big concern. And I think I've seen out of that some really good recommendations on how to address some of these worries. Now, I mentioned earlier about the Jason Matheny talk that I just heard, and it's like heavy on my mind, but his talk was really about the threats emerging from superintelligence in, biological and chemical warfare and cyber, and it was pretty doggone scary talk.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So I am very grateful to him and this and RAND Corporation for they're doing exactly what we need them to do, which is worry about those threats, identify those threats, and let's talk about how we can prepare for that and address that and get ahead of that.
Do you think, at a national level, we have a coherent strategy about how we're going forward?
Well, the administration has a strategy out there on AI. It was released, I don't know, it's been a couple months, I think. But their main, I think their main imperatives there, they want to be a leader. And I do think we need to be a leader.
Absolutely.
A world leader in artificial intelligence. So, really pushing artificial intelligence innovation. But the second big piece of their strategy is we got to build the infrastructure. AI takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of compute. And I don't think people really appreciate, maybe they're seeing some of the headlines about the investments of billions and billions of dollars in infrastructure to support AI. And certainly people have, I think for the most part, know about NVIDIA and some of the chips, the AI chips, and there's been a lot of debate about that. But the infrastructure doesn't exist today for so we got to build the infrastructure.
Right. We can't bring it on fast enough,
Right. And then I think the third component that, is really big component of the strategy is all about the security, because we're seeing so many bad actors using AI so successfully, although it's making a huge difference in cybersecurity too, as we are using it to automate and lift up our ability to be more timely in our security.
Yeah. I mean, I in my own personal use of it, I'm still surprising myself at times what I can do with it. And, I was on a panel recently with another great organization called the Cyber Guild. I was at the Uniting Women in Cyber event, and I was on a panel.
I'm the co-chair for them.
I know. That's why I plugged it.
I love them.
I almost put on I have a Cyber Guild shirt, nice blue shirt.
Gosh.
I was going to put it on, but then I heard.
We owe you a great thanks for your support.
It's a great organization. I love supporting it. Shout out Cyber Guild and Debbie and team.
Thank you.
Absolutely. But I was on a panel and we talked a bit about AI. And, when I'm on a panel or something, I like to get a hot take out there. But I think it's not a hot take to say AI will write better code than a human being can ever write. When it gets down to it, at some point the AI, it can write machine code. It can write in binary at a speed that we can't. The whole thing about development and software is we abstract away as much of the computer stuff into human language as we can. That's why software has inefficiencies and has vulnerabilities. It's translating that down the path into compiling into usable assembly code and whatnot. AI, sufficiently advanced, will tear apart any human software that's ever been written. All the cool protections, everything that we think we've done, sufficiently advanced AI should be able to tear all that apart and find every angle. On the other side of that, the AI writing the defensive software should be able to write fairly impenetrable defenses, but this is the race that we're going to be in. We're already in a cat and mouse in cybersecurity.
That's right.
The attackers always get a little better, and we get better on the defense as a result. They come up with some new thing that challenges our imagination where we're like, we never would have thought of that as a tactic. Sometimes I admire attackers for just like how ingenious some of the crazy stuff they come up with is. So we're going to be in this, and I think you're right to say, like, we have to be in a position of leadership. We can't cede this because of the capability that it will give people.
Yeah. 100%.
We have
And
big challenges.
Thank you for your support of Cyber Guild.
Of course.
I just think it's such a. I just love that organization because it does connect us and bring people together and lift people up, and in a just a mission area that touches everyone.
Yeah, one of the things I love about the Cyber Guild is the Uniting Women in Cyber event and the message. Right, diversity is a controversial word now, and it shouldn't be. I'm a fairly traditional cybersecurity practitioner, a male, bearded, kind of, that sort of thing. We need different points of view. We need different experiences. We need women. We need other cultures involved in this because it is a multifaceted, multicultural thing that we're trying to do. What is bigger than cybersecurity? It's on the level of every other major national issue, right? So we want that. And, organizations like the Cyber Guild, where you have mentors like yourself who have been in the early NSA, is one of the earliest women in the NSA, that where there was 6, I think you said 6 men to every woman in your technical training and all that. Having folks like yourself help raise the next generation goes back again to like that human on human impact. We can't lose that. That's what I think will make this all work.
Yeah. That's very kind of you, but well said.
Thank you. I practiced it. So we see eye to eye a lot. I see you and I both see a lot of optimism, right? Now we talk about some big, challenging topics. The world can look kind of scary. Look at the seminal moment in your NSA career with 9/11. That threat is real. There are those people exist in the world. Their tooling is getting better to create more havoc and destruction and pain for us. That's a real threat. There is the rising threat of belligerent actors like Russia, and China's amassing power. And there's a lot to be concerned with. We have big problems to be concerned with. But I find everyone that I talk to who thinks about those problems and doesn't drive themselves crazy is because they find optimism, and they have some thing that they're holding on to that grounds them in optimism and a belief that, we're going to end up on the other side for the better. I'm assuming that's true because everything that we've said,
that's absolutely
you're
true.
Grounded in optimism.
Yes.
And I want to ask you, because the tradition here is we end the podcast on an optimistic note, and I want to hear where your optimism comes from.
Where it comes from? Well,
or where do you find it?
Experience, perhaps? Is that a fair answer? Sure. I mean, look, our nation has the talent, it has the brain power to lead in artificial intelligence, to lead in quantum computing, to lead in a lot of these very critical technologies that are also threatening. And I believe in, and I have 5 grandchildren, and I am so impressed by them. I am so impressed by the people I meet. And every time I get with other people, and especially the young people, man, the things they know, and the way they're so dedicated to continuing to learn and continuing to be better. I find that refreshing. I realize that none of that really gets into the press and into the media because, the media has to talk about drama. I understand that. But there's a great story to tell in general about people and what they're doing in their own lives and what they're creating, not just for themselves, but for their children and their grandchildren. And I think that that's a story we should be telling about our nation and our country, because I think that is the optimism that you feel when you're in, when you have these, when we come together visibly, physically, mentally, emotionally, like after the 9/11. That's the story that, needs to be told more.
I won't add anything to that because I can't. Teresa, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's been great talking with you and getting to know you a little bit.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Watchers. For more great content, be sure to like, subscribe, and check out our channel. We'll see you on the next one.